Well, good morning, everyone. Thomas Montgomery. It's nice to be with you this Friday morning. Today is August 22nd, 2025. You may want to make a note. We will not have a Zoom on this coming up Monday. What would that be? The 25th. And then we'll resume on Tuesday. All right. So, yesterday we had a really good discussion about how we can use ABL, asset based lending, as an alternative form of financing for real estate. If you happen to miss yesterday's training, I encourage you to go to our YouTube channel and view it. Now we're going to flip the page, continue to talk about uses of ABL, asset-based lending, but in this case, we're going to talk about using ABL to acquire a business, and even more specifically, how we can go acquire profitable cash flow businesses, a business that's already making money that we can acquire using ABL and start generating profit day one. Now, my screen is shared here, so we have our talking points on the left. On the right-hand side, I have a web browser, and I'm on bizbuysell.com. This is one of several, I guess what you'd say, broker websites that matches sellers of business and buyers of business. And if you've not been on this, it's pretty fascinating. So let's look at it briefly before we get over to our agenda. So specifically, when you go to Biz Buy Sell, we can say, okay, we're interested in buying a business. So we click on this and we can search for a business. There are lots of filters. We can filter by state. Let's say that we want to look up Georgia, and then we can pick by industry if we want. We can pick by listing types. We can choose other filters. One of them I like to choose is cash flow, because if you're going to buy a business, wouldn't it be great to go buy a business that already has positive cash flow? So let's say that we're looking for businesses that currently generate at least $500,000 a year in cash flow. We can hit apply to that. And just in this example, we have whatever the hell this is, inflatables, cash flowing 1.3 million a year. Here, some sort of retreat, cash flowing 600,000 a year. HVAC company, cash flowing 1.8 million a year. But the point is, on Biz Buy Sell, you can go in and find lots of businesses. And also, there are franchises here. And we can search on franchises by industry, by cash required. Now, what's interesting, and you're in my world, we don't have to be very sensitive to the cost, because we can get financing regardless of the cost through ABL, which we'll talk about in a moment. Have any of you ever played around with Biz Buy Sell before? If you could respond yes or no in the Q&A. I'm just curious if this is a new resource for most of you or if it's a familiar resource. So we're not here trying to get you to go buy a business, but what we're trying to do is become more aware of how you and I can solve other people's problems. There are people that are looking to buy businesses that need financing. There are people that are looking at buying franchises and they need financing. You and I have an innovative way to be able to facilitate that financing. And so we'll go ahead and put that to the back of the screen, maximize this. And we're going to talk about business acquisition financing with just 1% down. Some people don't even have 1% down, and we can, in fact, finance that as well if we need to. So, introduction. Rather than starting a new business, you can buy an existing cash flowing business using a new financing option called ABL, asset-based lending. Our 501c3 nonprofit has created a strategic alliance so we can provide the assets. Because when you talk about asset-based lending, to no surprise, we need assets to qualify. Well, we can provide the assets as well as provide access to the lenders. I'm going to go through some of the benefits of ABL. And of course, these will be very similar to what we talked about yesterday, because The funding program is the same. The difference is the use of funds. What are we going to use it for? So let's talk about some of the benefits of ABL. Well, first of all, if you were to go pursue normal financing, like yesterday to buy real estate, or today to buy buy an existing business, typically lenders are looking for you to bring at least 10% cash contribution. 10%. Well, in our model, we can reduce that all the way down to 1% by using ABL. And above and beyond that, if we need to, we can even finance that 1%, which of course would get the out-of-pocket expense down to zero. Can't beat zero, right? As I mentioned a few minutes ago, we'll provide the assets because, again, that's key. If we're trying to do asset-based funding, we need to have the assets, and we transfer those in $1 million increments. So it's real, it's legal, it's legitimate. It's $1 million increments of accounts receivables. So this is probably the best category of assets to use because we can transfer them for a penny on the dollar. And then secondly, we can go liquidate them, which we'll talk about as we continue on. The third benefit of ABL is increased accessibility. Frankly, ABL is much easier to obtain than traditional acquisition financing or yesterday with real estate financing. The underwriting is simplified with ABL because it's really focused on the value of the assets versus a lot of other variables that other lenders might be concerned about. There are no minimum credit requirements. And I know most of you have good credit. The average credit score in the United States is what, 704. But regardless, there are no minimum credit requirements. So if you ran into someone that's not managed their credit as well as you have, it is not a barrier. ABL is faster. And one of the reasons that it's faster is, again, because it's using a narrow range of variables to underwrite based on the assets itself. The fact that it's unrestricted funds is huge. It's huge. And it's going to tie into a subsequent bullet we're going to talk about in a moment. But when we get ABL, they're not worried specifically about how you're going to use the funds. So you could use it to, or your client could use it to acquire a business, then have additional capital to expand, working capital. Because when you go buy a business, they're not going to sell you the cash. Let's say that you went and bought a pawn shop, for example. Well, so you could get the building and the inventory and take over the operations, but they're not going to give you money in the bank. So we're going to need some cash from day one to cover payroll and overhead. Well, we can use ABL for working capital as well as the acquisitions. And then we also talked about it could be used as a funding vehicle to acquire a franchise instead of an existing operating business, or it could be a franchise that's currently in operation that we're buying from the current franchisee. Typically, we're going to have higher borrowing limits with ABL. Again, we go in $1 million increments. So if we shrunk that back down, and let's see, we look at buying a business, search for a business, and then let's look at some of the more expensive ones, price range. Let's see, those that are, no, we'll make it at least $1 million up to no cap. So obviously there are bigger businesses that cost multi-millions of dollars, and here's just some of them. And so there's really no cap in how much we can borrow through ABL. We just get, again, increments of $1 million at a time. One of the biggest positive attributes, whether it be to buy real estate or any other use, ABL, it can be used to provide the funds so the client then becomes a cash buyer. because sometimes with real estate or acquiring a business, the seller wants to sell fast. And so if you have to wait and go through the underwriting after you found the given real estate from yesterday or the business from today's topic, that can add time and you might lose out to other cash buyers. With ABL, you can have the cash in hand, so it really feels like you're a cash buyer. As we talked about yesterday with the real estate, we have an innovative and legal approach. So normally we would have two business entities involved. So for example, and I'll show you in a minute, we'll provide a shelf corp for the client to use to access the ABL. So the money comes in to the shelf corp, but then usually the client will have a separate business entity that is the operating entity that has the assets. So what happens is then we can actually acquire real estate yesterday or today acquire businesses without a lien. So the lien is on the shelf corporation, not on your operating business. And that's a big deal to be able to own these assets free and clear. And then lastly, excuse me, we have a really interesting model where we'll actually pay the monthly payments for the client. And the way that that happens isn't too good to be true. But since we're transferring AR in $1 million increments, and since we're licensed, bonded, and insured as a debt collector, we can go collect that AR, and that creates a cash flow into the client. And the models actually develop whereby we're generating more income each month than what I shouldn't say mortgage, than what the monthly payment is. All right, so with that being said, let's talk about the action steps. If you run into someone, most of you are distribution partners. Again, our website's 509pacific.org. If you need more resources, you can become a distribution partner on 509 if you need. There's no cost to be a reseller. But essentially, if you have a client that's looking for getting ABL, the process is as follows. First, we want to provide them one of the free shelf corps. As a nonprofit, we received a grant. The grant has 3 mandates, one of which is to build financial literacy, the second of which is to give away free shelf corps, and the third is to use 1 and 2 to go put money into the pockets, into the hands, into the bank accounts of entrepreneurs. So we're going to always start with the free shelf corp that's going to leverage the ABL. With the shelf corp, there is a cost, but the cost is a processing fee. The cost of the processing fee is up to each of you, our distribution partners, but the shelf corp itself comes for free. The shelf corp's going to come with that business entity that's in good standing, both at the state and federal level. Also, we're going to provide a bona fide commercial address. And I think a lot of you underappreciate, well, I shouldn't say that. I think a lot of people in general underappreciate how important having a good commercial address is to getting financing. But we provide that. We provide the business plan, the use of funds, and the financial projections. Now, we can change any of these things. We can even change the name of the shelf corp if the client wants, but it comes kind of as a business in the box, ready to go. So that's step 1. So this would normally come through one of our branch offices or resellers, but you can get this from us directly if you need to on 509 Pacific. That's step 1. Step 2 is then we're going to transfer those assets over. How much are we going to transfer? It depends on what's needed. So if we go back and if we want to go buy this pool supply store in Lowndes, if I pronounce that correct, County, Georgia, we need 1.4 million to buy it, but we're probably going to also want some working capital and maybe we want some funds to expand. So the bottom line is we might need more than that, but we can transfer in $1 million increments as much as that's needed. Then we'll begin liquidating those receivables, get the positive bank deposits in. We'll apply for the ABL, and then the client receives their funds. Great referral program if you're interested. Get paid $50,000 for each referral, and that's mentioned also in 509. So we're going to cut it short today. We've got a big day ahead. If you need anything, let us know. We will not have training on Monday. We'll be back on Tuesday. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day. Bye-bye.